Amid growing national unease and louder calls for justice and free speech, the Press Union of Liberia has launched a strong criticism of the Boakai-Koung administrations, warning of what it calls a dangerous erosion of democratic values in the country. In a firm statement issued on Thursday, April 23, 2026, PEA President Julius Kanbat accused the government of undermining constitutional rights, particularly the right to freedom of speech and expression.
The Press Union of Liberia expresses deep concern over the gradual erosion of democratic norms, particularly the right to freedom of speech and expression under the administration of President Joseph Boakai. Democracy is not tested in moments of agreement, but in how a society treats dissent.
At the core of this message, Kanbat stressed that any administrations elected on promises of reforms and national rescue must remain committed to the principles that uphold democracy, declaring that these principles are not optional but essential to legitimate governance.
An administration that came to power on the promise of rescue must be guided by the principles that sustain democracy, respect for rights, adherence to the rule of law, and confidence in the independence of the judiciary. These are not optional values, they are the foundation of legitimate governance.
During attention to recent events, PEA President outlined what he describes as a troubling pattern, including the controversial removal of former Speaker Fonanti Kofa, the continuing detentions of Justice Opa Yenzi alias Perfeki, and the violent crackdown on peaceful protesters as an unlawful act.
We note with serious concern the controversial removal of Speaker J. Fonanti Kofa, the continued detention of Justice Opa Yenzi, the violent suppression of peaceful protesters, including students of the University of Liberia on April 14, 2026.
Turning to the legislature, the union also condemned the extra-legal explosions of Representative Yeke Kolba by a narrow majority in the House of Representatives, reportedly for expressing his view on a disputed territorial matter.
The extra-legal expulsion of Representative Yeke Kolba by a small majority of the House of Representatives for expressing his opinion on the occupation of a piece of borderland at the center of a dispute between Liberia and Guinea.
Warning of the broader implications, Kanbat said this action signaled a clear departure from democratic norms and risks undoing the country's high-end progress in press freedom.
These developments point to a worrying departure from democratic practice and risk reversing hard wrongdoings in press freedom, including the repeal of criminal libel, sedition, and malevolence laws.
Restating a fundamental principle, he maintained that freedom of expression is not a privilege granted at all, but a constitutional right that must be protected at all times.
Freedom of expression is not a privilege to be granted or withdrawn at all or at will. It is a constitutional right.
And with a call to actions, the president of the Press Union of Liberia urged the government to uphold freedom of expressions, respect the independence of the judiciary, and ensure that all actions affecting citizens are guarded by due process and the rule of law.
The PUL therefore calls on the government of Liberia to uphold and protect freedom of expression in both principle and practice, respect and strengthen the independence and authority of the judiciary, ensure that all actions affecting citizens are grounded in due process and the rule of law.
That the voice of the president of the Press Union of Liberia, and reporting for RCR News, I am Nyanpee Daniel Darziah.